Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Health Path podcast. My name is Alex Manos. I am the host, and today's guest is Paula Benedi. Paula is going to really break down and do a deep dive into the gut-brain axis for us as a way to help us understand the connection between gut health and anxiety. We talk about the four components to the gut-brain axis, the neurological component via the vagus nerve, but also the hormonal, the immune, and the metabolic. There are various hormones such as cortisol, various metabolites from our gut bacteria such as short-chain fatty acids, and various inflammatory molecules that can all impact our mental and emotional well-being. We then talk about some of the foundations that are important to put in place before we start to look at some of the more specific interventions that can be considered. So we start by talking about having something like a mindfulness practice. We talk around the research of forest bathing and the evidence we have showing us that spending time in nature is one of the best ways that we can modulate our mood and overall health. But then we navigate into talking about some of the more specific things, such as the role that psychobiotics can play within improving our mental and emotional well-being. Psychobiotics are specific strains of probiotic that have been shown to positively impact on our mental or emotional well-being. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you all. Before we dive into it though, just a quick shout out to the episode sponsor, which is the Live Kefir Company, who offer 3 different types of kefir: cow, goat, and coconut, meaning there really is something for all of us. Their multi-awards winning kefir is made in the traditional way using live kefir grains, which means that the 300 billion beneficial bacteria in each bottle reach your gut live, meaning that they can modulate your immune system, helping with fatigue and tiredness, but also with anxiety and stress as well. Live Kefir Company offer 11 and 22-day courses. They offer discounted subscriptions and a handy taster pack as well if you would like to try them out first. For you lovely listeners, we have a discount code, which is just Health Path, that you can use during checkout, and that will give you a 15% discount on your first order. So head over to livekefircompany.co.uk. There'll be a link below, and please do check them out. For now though, here is my conversation with Paula on all things gut health, gut-brain axis, and anxiety. I hope you enjoy, everyone. Paula, welcome to the Health Path podcast. It's really nice to connect.
Likewise, I'm so excited.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about gut health and anxiety today. But before we dive into this, are you happy just to share a little bit about you, who you are, what you're up to, and your background?
Yes, of course, I would love to. So I've had a long history in the field of natural medicine, and it all started with my own health issues, just like many other practitioners, right, in the natural field. But the problem is that it took me a very long time to overcome my symptoms, and it was unnecessarily long. And the symptoms ranged from absolutely everything, from a lot of gut issues, so bloating, gas, a lot of constipation, which of course meant that I was not excreting properly, and that led to a lot of skin issues as well. So I had severe acne, severe eczema as well. My hair was falling in clumps. I had a lot of fatigue. I could barely walk to the tube station to go to uni. I had a lot of very strange neurological symptoms, so things like blurred vision. I used to get very, very lightheaded upon standing, very dizzy all the time. I mean, it was just an absolute mess. And it was my own journey really that kind of like forced me to really use the tools that I had back then and just dive deep into medical literature and just a lot of books, and eventually becoming a certified integrative health practitioner. And fast forward to today, I run my own practice. It's all virtual, so it's super cool because I get to work with clients all around the world, and I love it. It is, I always say that it's the dream job, and the type of clients that I tend to attract are not the clients coming off a KFC diet or a McDonald's diet, it tends to be clients that have worked with the practitioner, that have worked with the naturopaths, the doctors, the specialists, but they just keep running around in circles and they're just trying to figure out what exactly is going on. So I tend to attract more chronic and more complex cases.
Okay, brilliant. And how would you like to segue into our topic today of gut health and anxiety? Is there a way that you want to kind of just introduce this? I guess in many ways, we're talking about the gut-brain axis here.
Yeah, so I think a great place to start would perhaps talk a little bit about what happens when you are in a state of anxiety. So you have your adrenal glands, which basically sit on top of your kidneys. We have the two main layers. So we have the adrenal cortex, which is the outer layer, and then the adrenal medulla, which is the inner layer. Now, the adrenal cortex produces a few hormones, one of them being cortisol, which is a stress hormone, right? Tends to have a lot of bad rep, but it's not necessarily a bad hormone. We do need cortisol. We obviously don't want it in excess. But we need good amounts of cortisol for blood sugar, for inflammation, for all sorts of bodily systems in the body. And then we have our adrenal medulla, which also produces a few hormones. And then one of them being adrenaline, which again is also a stress hormone. So both of these, the cortisol and the adrenaline, etc., they actually really strengthen the sympathetic nervous system state. So I'm sure you've spoken about this in the past, but if there's any listener here that's not aware of what the sympathetic nervous system state is or needs a little reminder, it's basically when you're stuck in the fight or flight. It's a survival-based state, right? It's a binary system. You're either in the parasympathetic nervous system state or you are in the sympathetic nervous system state. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system state is where you rest, digest, repair, restore the body, is when you're in homeostasis. Now, the sympathetic is a fight or flight, is a survival-based state. So again, on acute-based issues, right, it's great because it allows us to survive. But the problem becomes when it's a chronic, when you're stuck in the fight or flight chronically, because then that's just a recipe for disease. That is when you're headed towards your genetic destiny. So genes don't necessarily dictate your future. It's how you bathe your cells in, right? But basically, so how does it work? So your adrenal glands, they produce these stress hormones, and then it's your brain that perceives the stressor. So the stressor could be anything. So it could be a mental stress, like work, life, relationships. It could be physical stress, such as injuries, but it could also be chemical stressors, right? So today we're talking about gut health mainly, but it could also be things like other toxins, heavy metals, etc. Now, it's your pituitary gland that is located in the brain that sends a signal to your adrenal glands. But the hypothalamus, which is it's like the main boss in the brain, sends the signal to the pituitary gland first, and then the pituitary gland will send a signal to your adrenal glands to produce the stress hormones, right? So again, whenever your brain perceives a stress, any form of stress. Now, that is also called as the HPA axis, right? The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Now, as I mentioned before, this fight or flight state was great for example, for our ancestors. So, if there was like a lion chasing you, then you had three choices. You fought, you flight, right? You run away, or you freeze. And that was great. And that is actually how we made it as a species, is how we evolved. So it does have its uses, but the fight or flight mechanism can actually backfire. And if it backfires, then that is when it leads to a host of issues, and one of them being anxiety. And if you want, we can perhaps touch a little bit on the symptoms of anxiety.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's important to touch on this briefly because a lot of people are walking around with all of these symptoms, the unexplained symptoms, and they don't even know where those symptoms are coming from. And they could very often be a symptom of anxiety. So anxiety could present itself as muscle tension. It could lead to headaches, especially like tension headaches, heart palpitations, feelings of tightness or and inability to take enough air. So for example, when you're like grasping for air, excessive sweating is the big one. That's when you're stuck in the fight or flight. Excessive worry, obviously, and a difficulty controlling those feelings of worry. Sleep disturbances is a huge one. So that means both insomnia. So really having, a difficulty falling asleep, but also waking up in the middle of the night, especially to urinate as well. A lot of people wake up to urinate. That's because you're not tapping deep into the sympathetic nervous system state. You're locked in that fight or flight. You just can't switch off. Again, constant need to urinate as well throughout the day. And obviously we know that severe cases of anxiety can actually lead to panic attacks, and nobody wants to experience panic attacks, that's for sure.
Brilliant. So how does this connect in with the guts? So we've kind of introduced, I guess, the HPA axis. We've talked about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. I guess the third component of this is kind of the gut, the microbiome, the integrity of that gut lining, and how these can develop into sometimes vicious cycles as well.
Yeah, so 95% of my clients that suffer from anxiety are in desperate need of healing their gut. And that is because when you do that, everything else gets better. And that includes hormonal balance, it promotes hormonal balance, and also detoxification, right? So the gut is connected in multiple ways to the brain, and therefore has a direct impact. And as you said, that is basically the gut-brain axis. So the gut and brain are constantly sending signals to each other back and forth. And I always say that the gut and brain are connected in two main ways. So chemically and physically. Chemically, I would say, is mainly through neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters, for the listeners that might not know what neurotransmitters are, they're basically like the hormones of the nervous system, right? They regulate a wide range of bodily functions, but especially your mood. So for example, serotonin is one of those neurotransmitters that has been known, has also been called as the happy hormone, right? So it has a really big impact on your mood. And the serotonin is predominantly made in the gut, right? 95% we know is made in the gut. So if your gut is not doing well, if you have dysbiosis, if you have inflammation, you're going to have a difficulty producing serotonin. And you can test this, by the way. You can actually do this right at home. You can test your levels of serotonin. And the same thing with GABA. So I actually pay more attention to GABA when it comes to anxiety. When it comes to depression, I think serotonin has a bigger impact, but when it comes to anxiety, I believe that GABA is even bigger here, because it's basically a inhibitory neurotransmitter, which basically means it inhibits excessive activity in the brain, right? And we know that there are certain strains in our gut microbiome that produce GABA. So again, if you're lacking those certain strains of bacteria in your gut, then you're going to have a difficulty producing GABA. And the same principle applies here. You can test it right at home with at-home lab testing. Now, that would be mainly how they are connected chemically, but they're also connected physically, specifically through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is one of the biggest nerves that connects our intestines with our brain. Now, the vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve, and there are so many studies that show how different strains of bacteria have an impact in the vagus nerve that then can lead to symptoms of anxiety, right? This has been very well proven, very well documented. So again, these are just some examples chemically and physically, but going back to the GABA, it's very important to note as well that if you don't have enough GABA, you're going to have a real big difficulty in regulating levels of anxiety. So, you could do all of the mindset practices that you want, all of the mindfulness that you want, the meditation, which I'm a big proponent, by the way. I'm not saying that those don't have its purpose, because they do. And I truly believe that everybody should be practicing some sort of mindfulness. But you could be doing all of that. But if you are lacking GABA, you're not going to be able to sit down and meditate, because your brain is going to be constantly on. You're not going to be able to switch off. It's going to be impossible. So that's why I truly believe that functional medicine and integrative medicine is incredible because we truly approach anxiety through various different modalities, and that is when you can get the best results.
Excellent. And I think that the vagus nerve that you've obviously mentioned the sort of the neurotransmitter component of the gut-brain axis. Are you happy just to touch on sort of the immune side of things and how kind of a part of, I guess, this gut-brain axis is related to immune system and cytokines that can be influenced via the gut?
Yes, of course. I mean, for example, let's get leaky gut as an example, right? So we know that there are various things that lead to leaky gut, and that could be antibiotics, it could be birth control, it could be poor food combining, tap water, for example, because we know tap water contains certain heavy metals. Stress is a big one. We know that stress, mental stress, chronic stress can lead to leaky gut. Now, I know that you've spoken about leaky gut in the past, but basically it means that, you know, your gut lining becomes damaged, and then you have all of these tight junctions that become loosened. So now you have all of these things that are inside your intestines that are supposed to be in your intestines. They're not supposed to be in your bloodstream. Things like toxins, things like bacteria, undigested food particles as well. They start to leak into the bloodstream. Now, what happens now is that this leads to inflammation, and inflammation, like systemic inflammation, right? And then this inflammation can actually obviously present itself in various different ways: eczema, psoriasis, fatigue, joint pain, sleep disturbances, irregular periods, mood disturbances. But we're talking mainly here about anxiety today. So there actually has been studies proving how leaky gut actually has an impact on leaky brain. So leaky brain is another concept that they've been talking about a lot recently, and it basically what happens is very similar to leaky gut. So leaky gut is actually having an impact on the integrity of the blood-brain barrier, and now you're having, again, all of these toxins, all of these bacteria, inflammation that is leading to this, to this dysfunctional blood-brain barrier. And now all of these things are getting into the brain. And again, it can lead to a wide range of mental health issues, one of them being anxiety, but other mental health issues underlying as well, like Alzheimer's. We know that, right? So that's a little bit about how inflammation can contribute, to anxiety, and inflammation coming from the gut. I think maybe it would also be beneficial to speak a little bit about like this vicious cycle, right, that people can get themselves into, because as I said, if you have any sort of gut dysfunction, that being an imbalance in your gut microbiome, so it could be H. pylori, that would be more in your stomach, but you could have bacterial overgrowth, you could have candida, you could have parasites, you could have leaky gut. If you have any sort of dysfunction in your intestines, this can then lead, as we said, to a lot of brain-based issues, anxiety, right? But now let's say that you are not able to manage stress levels in your life, right? Let's say that you are just reacting to everything that happens in your life, because we know that, we cannot control everything that goes on our lives. But if you're able to control the inside of your body, if you can control your mind, if you can control your inner being, then who cares about what goes out on the outside world? Because it's all about your response to stress. But if an individual is having a difficulty with self-regulation and they are just causing themselves more stress unnecessarily, then that's going to send signals down the vagus nerve again to the gut. And that's going to cause a lot of gut dysfunction, because I have to tell you that I have two types of clients. I have that client that is down for everything, is down for doing the protocols, the supplements, the nutrition, everything, but also is down for doing all of the mindset stuff, right? They're going to do their mindfulness, they're going to go for their walks, they're going to do all of these things that we know that are important for self-regulation, and they are going to heal so quickly. But then I have a few clients that for some reason, they just focus on the diet, the supplements, and the exercise, but they forget that mindset has a really crucial role. And they are the only ones that they might heal, but they're going to relapse 3 months down the line, right? And they're going to be doing protocols after protocols, but they continue relapsing because their mindset is just not helping them at all. So again, this is a vicious cycle. So gut is causing anxiety. And now this anxiety, because you're not able to self-regulate, is then sending signals to your gut that is just making the situation worse. So it's causing even more inflammation in your gut. So you've got to just get yourself out of that vicious cycle. And it's not, listen, it's not easy. It's not easy, but you've got to put the work in.
So that, I guess, leads into maybe a deeper conversation around therapeutic interventions. We've laid a nice groundwork in regards to the gut-brain axis, the autonomic nervous system, and the balance there that is required to heal. You've listed quite a few things that can disrupt balance here, whether that's related to antibiotics or other medications, whether that's related to components of lifestyle, or whether that's related to more kind of psycho-emotional areas as well. So what would be some of the things that we might want to consider if someone came to you with these sort of cluster of symptoms? What would investigation, what would treatment, so to speak, possibly look like?
I think we need to first ask the individual what they would be interested in, because what I cannot do is create a plan saying, okay, you need to do meditation or you need to do yoga, but maybe they're not into that. And there's no point, because if you create a protocol, that is why it's so important to create a bio-individualized protocol. And you get a health intake and you ask the person, what do you like, what you don't like? Do you even have time for this? Because I work with a lot of people that they're just very busy. They don't have time to sit down for an hour meditation, right? So it's all about figuring out first what would be realistic for you and what would you be interested in doing? What would you enjoy doing? That's the first question, right? I think meditation can be very, very powerful. You don't have to do an hour meditation. You could do something like a 10-minute meditation. I even recommend walking meditations. But again, there's a difference between those meditations that are about sitting down and just emptying your mind, which I think can be very useful in certain situations. But then you have the active meditations. I think the active meditations are really, really incredible because they are basically a tool. They rewire your mindset, like it's the guided meditations, right? They rewire your mindset so you're then better able to respond to certain stressors in your life, right? So I think if you can do even 10 minutes every day, that's all you need, 10 minutes of a guided meditation, and use it as a tool to then be able to respond better in your day-to-day life, that alone will have a massive impact. But again, it's not about getting up of that meditation and then going back to your old habits, because otherwise, like if you're going to get up your meditation, then you're going to get stressed out because you're sat in traffic, then I'm sorry, but you didn't do a good job in that meditation. It's like having the most healthiest breakfast in the world, but then eating McDonald's for lunch, right? So you need to be super conscious of that. And again, it's hard work. It's not easy, but it's so worth it. It's so rewarding. So meditation is one of them. I think daily walks in nature can be very, very powerful as well. But again, not walking with your phone, that doesn't work, because then again, you're not switching off, right? Go without your phone, listen, or maybe some binaural beats. You can put some binaural beats in your headphones, but ideally going out in nature, maybe walking, throughout the park, just listening to the birds and the trees. That alone, there's so much research to prove that as well, that grounding, right? That contact with nature, that is incredible for activating the parasympathetic nervous system state. We have things like Epsom salt baths, the magnesium in that Epsom salt, because when you're in the hot water, in the warm water, you open up those pores in your skin and you absorb that magnesium from those from that Epsom salt, right? And it really is so powerful to, again, regulate levels of cortisol and then impact your parasympathetic nervous system state as well. Activate that parasympathetic nervous system state. Hatha yoga, right? Hatha yoga is incredible, but again, The problem is that with a lot of these techniques, like for example, yoga, with our Western-based mindset, a lot of people are now like, okay, yoga. If we think one thing is good, then we take it, we multiply that by 100, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Now there are people doing like yoga with weights, but that's not like the point of yoga, right? That's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system state even more. Sauna, but again, some people like exercising in their saunas, like that's not the point. It's going for a sauna and relaxing there and just sitting still, right? A massage can be a great way to activate that parasympathetic state as well. But again, same thing. A lot of people now going for like deep tissue massages, but you have this guy or woman just literally putting your elbow on your back and causing you pain, and pain, activates your sympathetic state. Like you don't want that. So massages are great. And again, you don't have to get a professional massage. Like you can do things like Abhyanga, which is a self-massage technique that they've been using in Ayurveda for thousands of years as well, which is great for the Vata body type, because the Vata body types we can talk a little bit about as well. But in Ayurveda, there are 3 main body types. We have the Vata, the Kapha, and the Pitta body type. And the Vata body type is also called the ectomorph body type. They are like the thinner body types. They tend to have a very overactive nervous system. So they are the ones that should be doing more of these parasympathetic activities, more of those massages, more of the yoga, more of the stretching. Again, stretching is so important as well, because a lot of people think that, you don't stretch to become more flexible. You can do that if you want, but you stretch to turn down the sympathetic nervous system state after a workout and to get into the parasympathetic state, right? So the Vata body type, the thinner, the hard gainers, they need to do more of those parasympathetic activities because they tend to be more prone to an overactive nervous system state. And also carbohydrates as well. We see a lot of women nowadays that they're just stressing themselves out in the gym so much, and they are lowering their caloric intake and their carbohydrate intake, but we forget that carbohydrates actually shut down cortisol. So if you're cutting down carbs, if you're lowering your caloric intake, if you're killing yourself in the gym, you're just making the situation worse for you. You're increasing cortisol. And then women complain. They're saying, I'm killing myself in the gym. I'm doing all of these boot camps and I just don't stop accumulating body fat. Well, the reason for that is that if you can't turn off the sympathetic state, if your cortisol is constantly high, that's going to shut down thyroid. If you shut down thyroid, what happens? You're going to shut down your metabolism. If you shut down your metabolism, what does that mean? You're going to burn less calories, right? Same thing with body fat. If you have high levels of cortisol, you're going to get more blood sugar into your bloodstream. And now if you don't use that, you're going to now accumulate that specifically in the midsection area, right? So I think people nowadays, they're just not peeling the onion enough. I think they're just staying at the surface based level. And we need to be able to peel that onion to be able to really get results long term. And that is another, I think I could also touch a little bit about like the long-term effects of anxiety, because it's not only about worrying, right? The long-term effects of anxiety, we know it can lead to obviously migraines and cardiovascular based issues as well. But also, as I was mentioning, like thyroid based issues. Like I cannot even tell you the number of times that I've seen people in my practice with a very high TSH, which again, in the eyes of conventional medicine, that's not still not under active, but it's not optimal, right? We know that conventional medicine ranges, they're just normal ranges and not optimal ranges. And they're doing everything. They did the selenium, they did all of these minerals and vitamins that we need for T4 to T3 conversion, but they are still having issues with their thyroid. And it's not until they heal their adrenals that is when we see that thyroid recovering. So again, like the adrenals, and again, sex drive as well is a massive one. A lot of people complaining about sex drive. Well, we know that cortisol has pretty much like an inverse ratio with testosterone, right? Cortisol goes up, testosterone goes down, and vice versa. So not only that for sex drive, but like for those men that they're trying to get those muscle gains, and they're so focused on that testosterone, But if you're stressed out, then you're not going to be able to heal that either. So that's a little bit about a little bit about everything, but I think I touched a little bit about the lifestyle practices um, that perhaps somebody can try to implement to start recovering. But again, I think it's very important to make sure that you are getting to the root cause as well. And we could also touch a little bit about on certain supplements as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just thinking, going back to what you were discussing earlier around a bidirectional relationship with the gut-brain axis, and how imbalances in the gut can drive certain states of anxiety. Are there things that you would sort of explore or consider? And as you say, sort of from a dietary supplement, but potentially lifestyle perspective, if we consider the bottom-up route, what are some of the things that you might consider there?
I think it's important to eliminate all of the triggers, right, that would perhaps cause inflammation in the gut, like for example gluten, right? We know that, again, it's a highly controversial topic, but that's what I've seen in my private practice. I've seen gluten to be highly inflammatory to the gut. So I think it's important to remove the triggers. Food sensitivities as well, right? When I say food sensitivities, I don't necessarily mean unhealthy foods, because a healthy food can actually be a food sensitivity from an IgG perspective. Now, you can test this right at home, again, with food sensitivity tests. But if you're eating a food that you're sensitive to, that is creating systemic inflammation. And you might not experiencing anything right away, because a lot of people say, oh no, but this food that came up, I eat it, I don't feel anything. Yeah, but we're talking about an IgG reaction, which can take up to 72 hours for that reaction to take place. So you might eat something today, even carrots, for example. You can be sensitive to carrots. You can eat carrots today, and then perhaps in tomorrow or on Wednesday, you can start feeling a little bit of anxiety, and it could very much be because of those carrots, because of that IgG reaction. So again, the carrots not only can contribute to anxiety, but it can contribute to inflammation as well, because you are sensitive to it, right? So I think removing the triggers, the foods that you might be reacting to, but also, the inflammatory foods, the gluten, the processed foods, the refined sugar. And then I think balancing blood sugar is very important as well, because again, if you have your blood sugar going up and down, the spike in blood sugar, and then leading to a hypoglycemia afterwards, the hypoglycemia drop can also affect anxiety. But again, this is obviously not related to the gut, but this would be another thing to obviously consider. What else? I think it's very important to, as I said, eliminate triggers, but then there are certain nutrients that you can take to help with the process. So while you work on the root cause, while you work on gut health, because you need to figure out first what's going on in your gut, right? You need to test. Is it SIBO? Is it parasites? Is it leaky gut, right? Do you need to focus on healing that gut lining? Is it candida? Is it yeast overgrowth? Like, what is it, right? You need to figure that out first. So you need to test. But then as you work on the underlying root cause, you can do those things. And you can implement certain nutrients. So for example, magnesium is excellent, right? Magnesium in the form of magnesium bisglycinate is one of the best forms of magnesium to be absorbed. Another nutrient that is excellent is B6. B6 is really, really important. There's so many studies that show that, but again, it has to be a methylated version, right? Because if you're not getting the activated version of your B vitamins, then there's a chance that you're not even absorbing that B vitamin, and it's actually becoming toxic and building up in your body. So there are a few nutrients that you can take. I actually have this guide on anxiety. You can get it for free at synergized.info/anxiety. And I basically take you through the exact 4-step approach that I use in my private practice to overcoming anxiety. So that includes like the biggest triggers, the specific nutrients that I use, lifestyle practices. So your listeners could always go there as well. After the episode, we can link it in the show notes if they'd like. But I think another supplement that works really, really, really well. I've seen that in myself because I used to suffer from severe anxiety, but I've seen it to work very well with clients as well, is CBD oil. But again, not any CBD oil. I'm talking about an organic CBD oil, full spectrum CBD oil, CO2 extracted CBD oil, right? And there are so many studies that show this as well. But again, you have to be taking at least 25 milligrams of CBD oil to truly notice a difference. And it's very rare to see a nutritional supplement that has such a noticeable effect the first time that you take it, right? It usually takes, with any nutritional supplement, takes a few weeks. And even then, the effect is a little bit subtle. It's quite subtle. But with CBD, you actually notice the effects straight away. It's like a wave of relaxation. And that is why it's so healing to so many different symptoms, right? But we know that it has been really proven to help anxiety. And I always recommend applying it sublingual, because and just leave it there for a couple of minutes, because you're better able to absorb that. You absorb it so much quicker. But again, I'm not talking about smoking marijuana. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here, it's not THC, it's CBD, right? Again, in that guide, I believe I also included the CBD oil that I recommend, because you need to ensure that you're not buying any CBD oil, because now there are so many people selling CBD oils that, again, they are not CO2 extracted, they are not organic. And that's why a lot of people say, I've tried CBD oil, it doesn't work. But it's because you haven't chosen the right CBD oil. It's not CO2 extracted. You have not put the right dosage, right? So there are a few things that you need to take into consideration.
And you mentioned it earlier, I think, as well, from a microbiota perspective, specific bacteria that have been discussed from a gut-brain anxiety perspective. So you mentioned earlier, obviously, thinking around SIBO and infections, but are there any specific probiotics? I'm thinking of kind of psychobiotics that you recommend.
Yeah, I think this is very important. And I think that's going to take me to the importance of lab testing, because you cannot do a one-size-fits-all approach. Every person is different, therefore every protocol must be different, right? For example, someone that has SIBO, right, bacterial overgrowth, you're not going to want to give them a bunch of probiotics, because that's just going to add more fuel to the fire. You're just going to make the situation worse. You have to eliminate first with certain biofilm disruptors, right? Because we know that these bacteria, they actually protect themselves with a biofilm layer around them. So you could take all the oregano oil you want, all the caprylic acid you want, but if you're not destroying that biofilm disruptor around that pathogen, you're not going to be able to get them with those antimicrobial agents, right? So you need to test first. And the great thing about stool tests that you can actually see the different strains that you have and how different the different antimicrobial herbs affect them. So for example, you might have a strain that it does not respond to oregano oil, right? And therefore you can take all the oregano oil that you want, but that's actually not going to have an effect on that strain. So the same thing with people with histamines, for example, people that have an issue with histamines, because they don't have enough of that enzyme called DAO, diamine oxidase, they're not going to be able to break down histamines in the body. And we know that histamines is highly correlated with anxiety, by the way. So a lot of people with anxiety issues, they cannot consume any foods high in histamines while they work on, because you can overcome histamine intolerance. A lot of people think that they have to follow a low histamine diet for the rest of your life. No, that again is suppressing the symptoms. You do that in the short term while you work on the underlying root causes as to why you're sensitive to histamines in the first place. So again, you can do the in the short term, you reduce the foods high in histamines, but the problem is that a lot of probiotics nowadays, they actually exacerbate histamines in the body. So I've worked with a lot of clients myself in the past when I was going through my own health issues as well. I could not tolerate any probiotics. So going back to your question, what probiotics? I think it's very important to start with first just one strain of probiotic. For example, Lactobacillus acidophilus is a great strain because it's a small intestinal strain. Because bearing in mind that anything that you put in your mouth actually passes to the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine. But if you put because majority of the bacteria is supposed to be in the large intestine, right? But if you put large intestinal strains through your mouth, there's a chance that it will stay in the small intestine and become overgrown. So you can actually cause yourself SIBO. Now, if you populate your small intestine first, right, and make it a little bit more acidic with Lactobacillus acidophilus, then you're actually building the foundation. Now, once your small intestine is doing good, once you have that strain, then maybe you can start reintroducing other strains of bacteria. But ideally, more small intestinal strains. All of the Lactobacillus strains are more of these small intestinal strains. The bifido strains tend to be more of the large intestinal strains. So ideally, a probiotic that contains more Lactobacillus strains than the large intestinal strains. That's what I've seen to work very, very well in my practice.
Brilliant. That's very interesting. I'm mindful of time. So is there anything that we haven't yet touched on, Paula, that you think you would like to ensure is within this conversation on gut health and anxiety?
I think we've touched pretty much everything that an individual needs to know to start their healing journey. I think it's just important to really emphasize again the importance of not only focusing on the physiology in terms of your gut and fixing your gut, but also making sure that you are, taking care of your mind. Because again, I cannot even tell you the number of times that I've seen people relapse and relapse and relapse because they are not taking care of their mindset. And I know it's easier said than done, but I'm telling you that you're going to be able to get much quicker results if you just make slight lifestyle changes. And that includes sleep as well, improving sleep and doing your mindfulness. And just is so important for you to be able to make that a non-negotiable, because a lot of people say, yeah, I need to start mindfulness, I need to do this, I need to do that, and they never started because it's not in their schedule. Like, you need to have a schedule for yourself and you need to put it in there what you're going to do. Be prepared. What are your meals going to be throughout the week? Making sure that you're not eating those inflammatory foods that are actually going to cause more gut-based issues, right? Prep meal. If you don't have time, prep meal on a weekend. Making sure that all of your meals throughout the week are there. Make it easier for you. When are you going to do your mindfulness? What sort of mindfulness are you going to do? Aerobic exercise is great as well for your adrenals, by the way. I used to focus a lot on HIIT training, on strength training, and I still do with a lot of my clients that are, on their weight loss journey. I think it's great. But aerobic exercise is actually much better for your parasympathetic nervous system state. It oxygenates the entire body. It's almost like a recovery kind of workout. So if that's the only thing that you can do to help with your adrenal recovery, then go for it as well, But as I said, you need to get to the root cause. So I think starting with testing, in my opinion, would be the best place to start.
Brilliant. Paula, thank you so much. There is an awful lot of information within today's episode, and I think touching on something that you just touched on around histamine and the role that can play, I definitely can see clinically, but also personally, the role that histamine can play in anxiety, so especially sort of just generalized anxiety. There is definitely a very strong connection there with it being kind of quite neurostimulatory. And that can also impact insomnia, and then you get in one of those kind of vicious cycles as well. So we'll add all of those links that you've mentioned and links to learn more about you to the show notes, so people can check out all of what you have mentioned as well. But thank you very much for coming onto the show. It's been wonderful to connect, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with our audience.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation today.